This is not healthy. This is not how you build a civil society. This is not how you sustain one. The fabric of society is a thin veneer, and it doesn't take much to destroy it. And that was obvious to some of us in March of 2020. You cannot simply flick a switch and turn off a complex society and not expect there to be severe consequences that we will be living with for generations.
We are Canadian lawyers.
In our country, civil liberties are under unprecedented attack.
Governments, public health authorities, universities, public and private employers, municipalities, and businesses
are trampling Canadians' rights and freedoms.
Our free society is at risk.
So the problem we've got is a fundamental one, in the sense that you got a, if I can put it this way, you've got a civilizational problem of a great proportion of the population believing in all of this madness. And it's just not so easy. If somebody comes in and says, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, this is the first, one step, one small step maybe. It's going to be a small step. Look, this declaration itself is not going to change anything. It's just one small bit of a whole push that needs to happen.
So the king hires the tailors, and the tailors say, I'll make you a set of clothes very expensive, but fools cannot see these clothes. And so they make the clothes, and then they bring them in, and the king can't see them. But he can't dare say, I can't see the clothes, because that would make him a fool. Right? So he puts the clothes on and shows the clothes to all his high officials, who have been told that these are special clothes that fools can't see. And they can't say that they can't see the clothes, because that would make them fools. And of course, the story of the clothes circles around the kingdom, and all the adults who can't see the clothes don't dare say they can't see the clothes. So they're all scared, both to look foolish and to be punished. Except for the little kid in the parade. Of course, the king is in the parade naked in these clothes. And the child doesn't understand the dangers of saying what he sees. And so blurts out, the king's naked. And everybody understands that actually the king really is naked and there are no clothes. And they're able to point and say, look, the kid is right. There's no clothes there. And then the king is embarrassed by the fact that he knew all along that he wasn't wearing any clothes. So, it's a great story. Anyway, that's kind of what we're hoping to do with the declaration. We're hoping to be the child in the parade saying, there are no clothes here. And we've all been subject to these extreme measures that are really unjustified. And the result of those measures has been to infringe our civil liberties. COVID rules restrict citizens' abilities to work, shop, travel, and socialize. They erode civil liberties strategically, attempting to not run afoul of the law or to trigger protections in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, such as liberty and security of the person, the freedoms of association, assembly, expression, conscience, religion, and mobility rights. Where COVID rules appear to have violated the Charter, courts have deferred to the state to take whatever measures it deems necessary, whether demonstrably justifiable or not.
And that's exactly what they're doing. All these little nuances and all these little steps that they're taking, they're very subtle, they're very structured, and they don't, on their own, each one of them, don't infringe on our liberties. But collectively, when you have so many things and it's such a gradual, for lack of better terminology, a slippery slope where we slowly, like a frog in water, in the hot water, and I know that's used a lot, but it just seems to be so applicable in our situation that because of the fact that you just do a little bit more, and there's some moral or legal or health justification for it, that people are becoming desensitized to all these overreaching measures by the government. When you put them all together collectively, very dangerous. It's very concerning. It's disturbing. I think that, and you're hearing some people, commentators talk about it, that eventually when the truth is told about this era in our history, that there will be measures taken so that these things don't happen again.
Legislatures have passed statutes that delegate broad discretionary powers to unelected public health officials, who then create draconian legal restrictions by fiat without public scrutiny or open debate. These directives give cover to private and public employers to suspend and dismiss workers who insist upon their right to decide their own medical treatments. In our system of law, no principle is more important than the right to control your own body and to make your own medical and health decisions. An anxious populace, swept up in a deliberate campaign of fear, now believes that individual liberties upon which our liberal democracy is founded are dangerous and selfish. A growing collectivism that demands safety at the expense of autonomy shapes public policy.
You know, the reality is we should never have done what we did in March of 2020. The pandemic plans that were in existence, which would have never contemplated trying to flip a switch on society and turn it off, that was just not something that was ever considered appropriate to do, and we did it. And some people expressed alarm at that time that this was a huge mistake, and that we better not be doing it for very long. Yet here we are, almost 2 years now, and we're still in the same position. We can't seem to extricate ourselves from it. And rather than achieving something, the vaccines have actually been a great boon for people who are vulnerable and elderly, it would seem, in the sense that it does seem to reduce the likelihood of severe outcomes. So what we should have done is said, this is great, make them available to anybody who wants them, anybody who feels that they need them, declare victory, and move on. But instead we have decided, some people have decided, that we're going to somehow eradicate this virus, and everybody who stands in the way of that goal is now being vilified as somehow less than human. And that is manifesting in the kinds of policies that we're seeing being imposed on people. To throw people out of their job where they've worked for 20 years onto the street and say, well, they shouldn't be entitled to EI, and they shouldn't be entitled to severance, and they shouldn't be entitled to anything. They're lucky they're leaving with their lives, is kind of almost the feeling that you get. They're just being so harsh and so draconian. Somebody has to stand up for these people.
Courts have embraced the pandemic narrative, some taking judicial notice of the nature of risks of the virus and safety of vaccines to adults and children. But the facts are anything but settled. Courts are supposed to be neutral. On COVID, as on any other contentious subject, their mandate is to find facts exclusively upon the evidence adduced by the parties in the courtroom. Instead, courts appear to have taken a side on COVID. Access to justice and the rule of law are now at risk. Unvaccinated persons are banned from juries, throwing into question the ability of all to obtain a fair trial heard by a jury of their peers. Irrational policies born of panic affect no one more than disadvantaged communities who already suffer from lack of access to justice.
But I've been frustrated by the fact that I've had many people approach me who are desperate. They need advice, they need information, they need representation and advocacy. And there seems to be a real lack of that being offered by the legal community generally. People are really struggling to find leadership and representation. And this is something small that I can do that at least lets people know that, I as a lawyer, I don't accept the response generally to the pandemic. I think that it's a health issue that could have been addressed in a much different way. And the fact that a health issue may exist or continue to exist, I think is not it's not an excuse to maintain or double down on policies that, in my view, have largely been failures. But I think if there's enough disagreement or contrary opinions or information that are presented or expressed, that can certainly cause our policymakers to think twice, to reconsider the policies that they've implemented. And we've seen different examples of that in how some of the policies have been rolled out or rolled back or amended. I think if enough people are reconsiderate of some of the information or arguments that are being presented to them, that can also cause policymakers and businesses and so on to re-examine the policies.
The right to privacy and control of personal medical information has been abandoned. Disclosure of vaccination status is becoming a requirement for working, traveling, entering public and private establishments, crossing the border, and sometimes medical treatment. Those who cannot or will not disclose face aggressive social disapprobation. Vaccine passports create the infrastructure for a global digital surveillance system. Institutions that last year were prohibited from collecting individual medical history now demand it as a condition of employment or admission. University and college students are being denied their education for refusing to disclose their own medical choices.
It's unbelievable what choices people are being faced with now, whether they have a job or whether they ever get to travel or see family outside of Canada again, or kids not being able to play sports that they love after having already been through a horrible year and a half, to take that away from them because they aren't being vaccinated. These are difficult and heartbreaking choices for people, and they feel like there's nobody listening to them. It doesn't seem like there's anyone on the other side who's willing to be compassionate or understanding or respect individual rights and freedoms. And so that's where we felt we really had to step in. We need people to understand that there are still people who value civil liberties in this country. Part of the problem is that these people are really being done a disservice by other lawyers who are making their lives as miserable as humanly possible. A year ago, in the legal publications for other lawyers, the discussion was, can employers mandate vaccines? And the consensus seemed to be, no, they can't. Well, then suddenly a year later, the consensus is, yes, they can, and they must. And by the way, they should be terminating you for a cause. And you shouldn't be allowing any loopholes. They shouldn't be given the possibility of working at home, and they shouldn't be allowed to skirt the mandate by going on sick leave because they're anxious about the vaccine. I mean, they're dismissive, and they are looking down on people. They're mocking them in some ways. It's appalling. And so, somebody needs to stand up for these people.
Medical regulators have become dictatorial. They have warned doctors not to express medical opinions that might conflict with official COVID policies, effectively censoring them, and directed them not to certify grounds for medical exemptions from vaccination requirements, rupturing the physician-patient relationship and breaching the principle that only a practitioner who has examined a patient is equipped to give a diagnosis. Human rights commissions, which until recently championed expansive interpretations of human rights, have issued edicts narrowing grounds for accommodations. But how to avoid being sort of mentally taken over by them is really just the same kind of formula that we've been talking about, which is treat everything with skepticism. Understand that everybody, and when I say everybody, I mean government, I mean public health officials, I mean institutions, I mean companies, big companies, everybody has an interest. And those interests may not be your interests. And so when government gives you a message, the message is being given to further their interests. Now, sometimes they might align, but you can't assume that they do. And in this situation, I would say that mistakes, big mistakes, serious mistakes have been made from the very beginning. And what may be happening, may have happened since that time, is that in order to deal with the initial mistakes, there's been doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. And they really can't afford to go backwards now unless there is more or less a massive portion of the population that says, we're done. We're done with this. Enough. Public opinion matters. I'm afraid it matters to everything. And it's not enough, I'm afraid, just to be right. You have to have also enough people who agree with you in order for change to happen.
It says something in itself that people are inclined to sign anonymously, if at all, because they are, not comfortable, actually publicly associating.
I think we should underline that point. I think it's a very, very good point. Here you've got a declaration, and you've got, as you say, 80 to 100 lawyers. 80 to 100 lawyers in Canada in 2021 who are too scared for their own jobs to put their names publicly on a declaration that says we should be free. That's where we're at.
COVID rules are inconsistent and irrational. Authorities enforce them selectively and preferentially, coming down hard on common people while turning a blind eye to the privileged. COVID vaccines do not prevent people from becoming infected or from transmitting the virus to others, yet only unvaccinated persons are banned or required to undergo testing. People who have recovered from COVID and therefore have natural immunity are still subject to vaccination mandates, even though the purpose of vaccination is to mimic natural immunity. Governments, public health authorities, and employers advise that COVID vaccinations are safe, but pharmaceutical companies have been granted immunity from liability, and no employers will accept legal responsibility for side effects or adverse events, whether minor or serious, suffered by their employees who take a vaccine that they do not want. The risks posed by COVID vaccines may be in dispute, but they are not zero. Particularly for children and healthy young adults, they may be riskier than the virus.
So the declaration is designed for a couple of purposes. One is to show people that there are, in fact, still people out there that are willing to go to bat for them, and there are still a number of lawyers doing this sort of work, and just also to let them know that they're not alone and they're not crazy. If you feel like something is not right in this country, you are paying attention. Things aren't right in this country. And it's like the emperor's new clothes. You need somebody to say it first, that this is not the way things are supposed to be. This is not healthy for our society. This is not the way we treat other human beings. It's a complete lack of compassion and civility towards other people in our country. This is supposed to be a society that is built on the foundational principles of individual liberty, rights and liberties. And while, sure, we all need to pull together sometimes, this has gone way, way beyond. This has gone to the point now where nothing makes sense, nothing adds up anymore. The rules are inconsistent. They are applied heavily towards some people and not others. They aren't based in science. And at the end of the day, the harms from what we are doing are going to be far worse than anything that this virus could do to any of us. So this is also giving them something to rally around, to become part of a big movement to stop COVID.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together. And again, anyone who's an outlier is part of the problem. And so this is the kind of thinking that can lead to very bad places and has historically done so. And then, of course, you've got the mass media and the government feeding that fear, and deliberately so, because they were trying to get people to be riled up about this enough to go along with their lockdown ideas.
Right.
And of course, once you let that genie out of the bottle, fear is not an easy emotion to work with. Once you unleash it, you can't put it back very easily. And so what Desmond says is you may not be able to stop it, but you can keep that mass formation from getting deeper and leading to those very, very dark places by continuing to talk and by continuing to have that alternative narrative out there, so that because if you don't have that, then everybody just gets sucked into the existing narrative, and then things can get very, very ugly.
We fear the erosion of our free society. We question the single-minded fixation on a virus that poses little risk to most people. We protest the uncalculated harms that COVID policies are causing to people's health, livelihoods, relationships, and mental states. We oppose the mass hysteria and anxiety that governments and the media are fueling. Most of all, we object to the deterioration of our civil liberties and the failure of our legal institutions, legislatures, governments, administrative bodies, and courts to protect them.
I care about my family. I care about my friends. I care about the people in our country, that if we don't, I don't think we have a choice. I think we're at the point now where if we don't speak up, where are we going to be a few months from now? Now I think you have to speak up, or, remain silent. If you remain silent, shame on you, in my opinion, because I think there's such transgressions right now that I think there has to be someone to advocate on behalf of those people, and that's what our training is, to do that.
Restrictions on our civil liberties, which have been curbed seemingly for a practical purpose, but for many people, that practical dilemma or question is past, and it no longer makes sense. I think for many people it doesn't make sense, and more I think it's going to be the case that people are, just kind of fed up. They're not willing to comply anymore. They've suffered damage to their business, their personal lives, their health, because COVID isn't the only health risk, that a person can suffer. Maybe they're suffering from depression. Maybe they've not been able to participate in, activities that keep them trim and otherwise, active and so on. So, many people have suffered a lot. They've sacrificed a lot. So I do think that, people are, in many cases, reaching their tolerance levels.
I'm very passionate about this declaration because without sounding tacky about it, I do think it's hope for people. It might be a very small piece of hope for them, but as it grows, I think we're going to do something, and I think we're determined to do something. So,
the declaration is a piece of hope, and also definitely a warning that the time is now. The time is now. We've gone into a dark place. We've been going there since March 2020. In fact, we started going there before that. The soil was prepared before that time, but was ready for the COVID plant to grow, and it has grown enormously. It's past time to say that we've had enough and that we need to go back to what we had before, if we can still do that. I mean, some people, maybe including me, wonder if that's possible now, because we've seemed to have crossed the line. Not just by governments, and governments hate to give up powers that they've taken over, but even more importantly, seemingly by a significant portion of the population that approves of all of this. And that perhaps is the most disturbing thing of all, that they have left behind the country that we thought we lived in. And if we don't fix that soon, that country's not coming back.
We are appalled by what is happening in our country. We call for the immediate end of vaccine passports and mandates.
We propose a public inquiry into the handling of all aspects of the declared pandemic.
Canadians should have control of their own lives and have the right to make their own decisions
about their health, medical treatments, personal information, travels, and associations. Canada is supposed to be a free country governed by the rule of law. Restore it now, or risk losing it for good.